Hey everybody, welcome to the Creativity Cave with Dina Rico, and today I'm going to show you how to make this really beautiful card featuring the ghost stamping technique. And there's lots of different ways you can do this, but the way I really like is to use some white craft ink onto my cardstock and then put the ink on over the top with a brayer. So this is a little bit messy, so you want to make sure you've got some paper to protect your work surface, but let's get started. I'm going to start with a piece of cardstock that is, I think it's about 2 by 3 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to use my basic white ink pad and stamp this large leaf from the Autumn to Remember stamp set. This is a stamp set that came out this month in our scrapbooking brochure. You can also find it online. It is a really great stamp set that I have had the best time working with. And if you spend $50 or more in my online store, you'll get a free card kit featuring this stamp set and some super cute cards that I made during my live, my YouTube live on the 16th of September. Okay, so I'm inking up my stamp with some white ink, and I'm going to stamp it on my vanilla panel. And I'll just stamp this on here, 2 or 3 times, kind of depending on, how you can fill up the space. All right, then what I want to do is actually stamp another piece. This is about a 3/4 inch piece, and it's actually going to go on the inside of our card. So I'm just going to stamp this again a few times so that we can kind of decorate the inside of our card. It's longer than I need it to be, but you get the idea. Okay, now I think the important part of this is to get this to dry, at least partially. And you'll see why in a few minutes. So I'm just going to heat set this ink. And I do have kind of an interesting thing that I noticed when I was doing this. So I had stamped this stamp, and you might even be able to see the image on here because my photopolymer stamp had some of that Berry Burst ink on it from, previous use. And when I inked it up with my white ink pad, it didn't like contaminate my ink pad per se, but that ink kind of lifts the color out of the photopolymer a little bit. So I'm gonna, you can kind of see it on here. My ink is literally kind of turning pink. So the longer it sits on here, the more you might notice it. But you don't see it here either, but it is just a teeny bit pink. So my advice to you is let that white ink sit on your stamp and then clean it with like a scrubby, not a chamois. And then that will clean your stamp really well. So I'm going to use our Stamp and Scrub to actually clean this versus my chamois. And I'll link all of this stuff. And then that just gets maybe a layer of the ink that's kind of stained on your photopolymer off a little bit. So there you go. Okay, now back to our cards. I want to add some color to this. So I'm going to take my brayer and use Cajun Craze and Berry Burst ink. I'm actually going to start with the Berry Burst. And so I'm going to ink up my brayer. Remember, you want to flip this up so those little rests are poking up. That way they won't get your ink pad. Okay, and then I'm just going to roll my ink on here. And you can start to see that leaf shining through. I'm going to let that sit for a minute. Actually, I'm going to put one more layer on, maybe a little skinnier layer. And I'm not putting it on, perfectly. We're going to put more color on here in just a minute, but I want to do this piece as well. So we'll ink this up. Now this is the inside piece, so I'm not as worried about this being critical, but there you go. Okay, now you can carefully clean this. I'm saying that jokingly. because I'm using a fairly similar color in the Cajun Craze. It's not going to be a huge difference. If I were using like a light color, like a yellow or a, a subtle color, or like a color out of the subtles, I would actually clean this like under the faucet. Okay, so now I'm gonna once again add some color to this, and I'm not going over the whole thing because I want to see both colors, but I have noticed the more color you put on top of the stamped images, the better they pop through with that ghost stamping technique. Okay, so let's add some of our Cajun Craze to this piece. And you can really see now that I've added more ink, it does show up pretty nicely. So isn't that cool? So every time you do this, you're going to get a little bit of different look. So you can certainly play with all sorts of different color combinations for this and really have some fun with it. I think it's a really fun technique. Now let's take these pieces and put them into a card. So I took a 4 by 5¼ inch panel of Very Vanilla, and then I embossed it with this plaid. I think it's called Simply Plaid embossing folder, and it shrunk the cardstock just a little bit. So I trimmed it so that it would be roughly 3 7/8 by 5 1/8, and then I'm going to adhere it to this. And the reason, which is a 4 by 5¼ of Cajun Craze. The reason I mention this is I think it actually shrunk this way a little bit more, or maybe it shrunk this way. It shrunk in one direction more after the embossing, and I think it's just the design. I don't really know for sure. But sometimes that does happen with embossed images in our 3D folders, is that design does need to be taken up with, space in your cardstock because of the impression that it gives you. So just be aware of that. So I did trim it after I embossed it so that it would fit on my panel nicely. Okay, so I adhered that. You can see I used a little bit of extra adhesive from what I typically do just because I want to make sure that it stays down nicely, because this folder does really emboss quite a bit. All right, I have a card base that is Berry Burst, which is just one of my absolute favorite colors for fall. We'll give that a good crease and then adhere this right over the top. And then I've got a panel of 4 by 5 1/4 vanilla for the inside of my card, or at least I used to have that. Hold on. Let me grab one. All right, and so we're going to take and adhere this little piece to the bottom, kind of like it's designer series paper, but I love how it just carries that design through to the inside of our card, and it looks just fantastic. We'll trim that excess off and then go ahead and adhere this to the inside of our card. Now you can certainly use this design for any sentiment. It's just kind of a really good design. Oh, can you believe I just did that? You probably can totally believe I did that. So I'm going to use my sand eraser. You can get a sand eraser, comes in my adhesive kits, and I will link that in the description of this video where you can get one. You can also get one at a discount when you order any of my classes, which is kind of handy. And oh gosh, didn't that just save the day right there? It's just got a little fine grit sand embedded in the eraser, and you want to use a real light touch because you can literally like wear a hole into your cardstock, but it erases little mishaps of ink, just like that one, because sometimes this is a little bit of an inky process. So anyway, there we go. We fixed that. Let's adhere this panel to this panel. So I've got a 2 1/4 by 4 inch Cajun Craze panel. And I'm going to take my snips and carefully, I'm opening them up carefully. I'm going to kind of distress some of the edges, not being perfect. And look, I kind of ripped that. That's fine. It kind of just gives you the sort of a shabby chic look to this, which I really like. And oh, isn't that beautiful? I just love those colors. They're so vibrant and beautiful. So let's take, and that ink's probably not dry, so I'll do this on my desk so I don't get ink anywhere else I don't want it on this project. Okay, we'll place that down. Then I've die cut this label from my Greetings of the Seasons dies. This is a really great set of tag dies that if you don't have it, I highly recommend it. This was in our online exclusive release that came out this past, I want to say July. Anyway, love these dies so much. I've been using them a ton. And so I'm going to stamp my sentiment. Now my sentiment comes from a set called My Small Business. And even if you are not a My Small Business or a small business, I really love this set for the thanks. And the thank yous, the thanks, the thank yous, and then the made with loves. I think they're really great. And then, of course, there's a couple other cute images in here, a present, a shopping bag, some hearts, and I love this little shop local tag. Obviously, if you're not a small business, those might not really work for you, but many of the images I think are great for anybody. All right, so I'm going to stamp that thank you. This is my favorite. You can tell because I've been using it a lot. And I'll just stamp thank you in some Berry Burst ink on here. And then I wanted to make it coordinate a little bit better. So I'm going to take my clean leaf. I'm going to ink it up with some Cajun Craze ink. Stamp off a layer of that ink. And by the way, can we just talk about how beautiful this design is? It is so gorgeous. I love how they made those leaves. And then I'm going to stamp this just kind of partially on my little tag here. And how cute is that? Now I wanted to add a little something to this. So I'm going to take some of my jute twine. This is Cajun Craze. I've already pulled one layer off of it to make my sample. I'm going to pull another layer off. It's kind of a twine that has 3 threads twisted together. So I just separated them out for a couple of reasons. One, I think the twine on its own is pretty thick and I didn't want that big lump on my card. But I also like how it's kind of kinky when you pull them apart. You get some extra texture in there, but it's not thick, so I love that. So anyway, I'm just going to tie this on my tag, and then we'll tie in a bow, and then I'll trim off the ends. And I just think this makes for such a cute card. And then you can reuse those extra layers for whatever you need. And I think it also helps your twine go a little further, which is always a good thing. Okay, so and they're pretty easy to pull apart. All right, so I've got this on here. Let's just trim those ends a little bit, and then I'm going to, I did a double layer here and I thought it was too much, so I did a single layer on the card I'm making right now, and I like the look of that a little bit better. Of course, we're going to pop this up on our card. I mean, that would be crazy if we didn't, right? And then finally, I thought we needed a little extra something on here. So I'm going to take my Wink of Stella and do a little spritzing. As you probably know, this is one of my favorite techniques to do. So I'm just going to take my my Stella here and smack it against my bone folder. And then I will get little shimmer bits. I think this might be I think this is my empty one. I think this one's better. There we go. More's coming out now. All right. So when I do that, I get some shimmer, and hopefully you can see that on here. It's just so pretty. So I just love how this card turned out. I hope you like it as well, and give this technique a try. Now, a couple more tips for you. I want to show you some examples that I did, kind of practicing the technique. Another way you can do this is actually with like a solid stamp. So I stamped the smaller oak leaf here in my stamp set. I stamped that kind of a few times going across my panel of cardstock. And then I stamped a solid stamp over the top, this little solid stamp. This is from the Friends for Life bundle, that image. And the solid stamp did a good job of kind of picking up that color, but it wasn't super good across. And so I felt like it needed a little bit more ink. So then I switched to my brayer. And so I found like I liked this, but it was hard to get, you know, distinct colors on here that looked nice. So then I went to one piece and I liked the look of that. Now this is what was interesting is I did another one. So this was like my first one. And actually I think I used my blending brush on this, and you can see the image is not quite as clear. And so I think the blending brush actually kind of rubbed out the white ink a little bit. So that's part of why you want it to be dry before you add color over the top. Otherwise it'll just smear, right? And we don't want that. So then my final test before I did this one was I had put some ink over the top with my brayer, and then I actually took this same stamp and I went over it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And I noticed when I had multiple layers of ink on here, it popped out even more vibrant. So I thought those were some really good tips for you in terms of using this. Now, one thing I didn't try, but I know will work, it just kind of depends on what you have or what you want, is Versamark. Versamark will do the same thing. Again, you're going to want to let it dry so that it doesn't smear. But I did kind of like the white ink for whatever reason. I don't know. I did. Again, I didn't try this, but I know it will work. So have fun, experiment with different images. You know, on this one, I noticed, I think because I did a few more, it might have made a difference. And actually, we'll even give this a shot real quick, because I'm just going to stamp over this. And we'll see if that darker section makes a difference. Although this was my very first one, so it's been kind of done for a while. And I don't know. I don't see it. But I think the darker worked best, in my opinion. So anyway, I hope you loved this card. Thank you so much for being here. If you could give me the thumbs up on this video, that would be just the best. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my other awesome videos. I will be back live next Monday, so come join me. I believe that's September 30th. So have a great, great weekend, and thanks for stamping with me today, friends. We'll see you soon. Bye.